Sloan, and I'm here to give you a few sort of insider tips from my book, Teach Me to Machine Quilt. In the book, I've written a ton of information, and it has all kinds of photo step-outs and projects, but I know that visually, sometimes it's a lot better to actually see it in action, and so I want to walk through a couple of features that are pretty much things that are go-to for me and that are basic that you're going to use often. You're really going to use them a lot. So I have a little project here of basically scraps. I did a scrap quilt of large half-square triangles and made a little top so that I can use it to walk through different features and play around, and it's just sort of a working piece. Could be a baby quilt when it's done, because I know you want something done when you're finished. It's no fun to just practice for no reason. You could also use a panel. Those are good, and then you didn't have to do any work. So I am working today on the Baby Lock Crescendo, and it has all the features that I like to use. And I'm going to start, this is sort of done with a diagonal here design, and I'm going to start on the inside, because one of the things that people always sort of ask me and are worried about is like, oh, how do you start and how do you stop? There's different ways, and many of the machines have a locking stitch, and that's my favorite way to start and stop. So the first thing I have to do is lower the presser foot, and I need to pull the bobbin thread up to the top so I don't get that tangled mess on the back. That's why that happens, because you don't have everything sort of tight when you start stitching. So I will lower the presser foot, and then I have to grab the thread, and I'm going to do needle up and needle down. And then I'll raise the presser foot just to give me a little looser tension on the fabric and pull up the bobbin thread. Now in this case I had a short bobbin thread, so that's fine. It's still up there on the top and not on the bottom. And I'm going to use the locking stitch, and it is a button on my machine that's a bullseye, a circle, and it does a few stitches in place. And I will end up taking these long threads and the short thread and just trimming them off later on. So now I am going to work with the guide beam. The Baby Lock machines, many of them have this guide beam or laser beam, and you turn it on. So it's got on the control panel over here, there it is, off and on. Now if your machine doesn't have a guide beam, then I would suggest you find some position on your foot. Like in this case, I could be using, there's an inner line there that I could work with. So I'm going to leave the guide beam on because I prefer to see the stitch instead of quilting in the ditch where the stitch would be more invisible right along that seam. So I'm about 1/4 inch away with the guide beam. And now I'm just going to start sewing, and I can control my speed by my foot pedal, so I can go very fast, I could go very slow. But if you are fairly new to this, or you like to have a lot more control, many machines have a speed control. So I'm going to put it about in the middle. So let's see if I go down here. See, I'm pressing harder, and it just basically stays the same. It's not going to go like at the speed of sound, like it will if I've got the speed control all the way up. Now the next thing that happens when you're using your walking foot is that you need to pivot. So a pivot point comes when I hit here. I'm going to keep going and turn. And this is a pivot point. And there's a couple things to watch out for. So I'm going to show you what I do when I get to this point. I'm going to come down and I go real slow. Another stitch, and now I'm right in that sewn seam that I have here. So I'm right at that point, and I need to turn the whole sandwich, this whole quilt sandwich. And I have the machine so that every time my needle's down, the presser foot lifts, which is really nice. If your machine doesn't do that, then at this point you will need to lift your presser foot a little bit so that you actually can pivot. And now I'm going to turn. And I will be going that same distance down this next way to go down here. So I have to keep going all the way down. All right. Let's put I could put the presser foot down, but I want to be sure that I haven't bunched up this fabric. So I put the presser foot down and then just lift my needle once to release it. What that does is it releases the fabric so that if when I pivoted it was all bunched up to the needle, it won't make a weird stitch. That's really what I'm trying to avoid. I don't want to have some sort of strange stitch at that point. Okay, now I'm going to go down here again. I want to show you another slower speed than this. If I took my speed dial all the way down, then I can go very, very slow. This is wonderful if you're really trying to control where you're stitching. You might be going around something that needs finessing, and so that will do it for you. It will allow you to have the utmost control. So I'm going to come all the way down to this next pivot point, and then I want to show you a different stitch, because when we get down here, I mean, you might you might do this same stitch the whole way around the quilt, but there are other sort of decorative stitches on the machine that look really nice. So I want to pivot again, but this time I'm going to do a decorative stitch right down the center of this so that you can see something a little bit different. So let me get sort of more in the ditch so the stitching is more invisible. So now I am right there. So I don't really see it. I'm not a 1/4 inch away. I want to pivot again. And now the guide beam is helping me because this lets me know I didn't go like this, where I'm all cockeyed. And I'm right down the middle. And I'm going to come over here and I'm going to change stitches. I've been on a straight stitch. I'm going to go down to my decorative stitch panel. And I know that the stitch I want is on the next page. And it's 217 on this machine. And it's called I call it a serpentine. Because I have the guide beam on, it shows me that the guide beam is right down the middle of the serpentine. That can be useful if it's distracting to you, then you can just turn it off. So I'm going to turn it off for a minute so you can just see the serpentine will do this really nice curve, and it gives you something that's a little bit different. I often will do this for open sections. You can adjust the serpentine so it's really wide or it's very narrow. And you just sort of follow all the way down. And I'm just going to end it so you can see how I end stitches. So if I was going to end this one, I would want to be right in the ditch because that sort of hides the ending point. I would do the locking stitch again, which is several stitches in place. And then you can use an automatic thread cutter, or you could cut the threads yourself. So now I would continue on with a plan for this quilt. I might do a lot of outlining and then come through with multiple serpentines or just one serpentine and more outline, straight stitching. There's lots of ways you can approach this. I hope that you enjoyed getting a few more tips on machine quilting, and you can find lots more videos right where you are.